Hello, my name is Katie and welcome to a mid-month wrap-up. I somehow managed to read 14 books in the first 2 weeks of June, which is insane. And I decided I needed to film something so I don't forget and so that my final wrap-up at the end of the month isn't an hour long. As you probably saw in the title, this is also kind of serving as an announcement for a live show that I'm doing Saturday, June 19th. It'll be on Amrita's channel. I will hopefully get my life together and have it linked in the description box. It's going to take place noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, and we're going to be discussing the book Avidly Reads Guilty Pleasures by Arielle Zibrak. This is sort of a long-form essay discussing about how typically feminine interests are viewed as guilty pleasures. And it was a very interesting read. I'm not sure I connected totally with all of it, but I'm very excited to talk about it with Amrita and Rosie and just get their thoughts and their opinions and their viewpoints on it and see if maybe that helps me figure out more of how I feel about it personally. Aside from that, we're just gonna go more or less in order of how I read them this month. So the first book I finished was Tsarina by Alpsten. This was amazing. This is a debut novel, so I wasn't totally sure what I was getting into. But from what I can tell, now I'm not very well versed in Russian history, but based on reviews that I've seen and read from people who know more than I do, the history does seem fairly sound, with the exception of we don't know much about our main character's early life. So this is following Marta, also known as Catherine I of Russia. What we do know is that she was born into a family of serfs. She wasn't really expected to amount to much because that's not how the world worked. And somehow she manages to get herself into the position of the highest in the land. It was very interesting to see how the author took what little is known about Catherine's early life, and then what I suspect she did is combined it with what she knows about what life was like for the poor, the disadvantaged, at that time in history. And I thought it was very well done. A lot of it is quite gossipy, which makes you really want to keep going. It has the feeling sometimes of like watching a reality TV show. It's like a total train wreck, and you're appalled at some of the things that are happening, but oh my god, is it totally fascinating. So I really enjoyed this. I can't recommend it highly enough if you like historical fiction. The next book I finished was What's Your Pronoun? Beyond He and She by Dennis Barron. This I read for my reading vlog, which will be coming at the end of the month. Like I said in the reading vlog, I think a better title would have been In Defense of Singular They, because that seems to be what the author is driving at. So he does a lot of research into the idea of why English doesn't have a singular non-gendered pronoun, whether that be because he and she don't really fit you as a person, or if you're attempting to hide somebody's gender in a conversation, things of that nature. He did a ton of research, went back hundreds of years looking for examples of people either creating their own pronouns to fill this void or using they instead. And honestly, his whole point at the end was that we don't need a different pronoun for it because they has been filling that gap for hundreds of years and it suffices perfectly. It was pretty interesting looking into the history of it. There's a lot I didn't know as far as he was used as like an all-encompassing pronoun, and a lot of it I guess is based in Latin. He was like, males were the better gender or whatever stupid shit. So when they would say he, they would oftentimes use it to mean an entire group of people. So in laws it appears a lot. And this became a problem when women were fighting for the right to vote. Their point was that all laws, even ones that women must follow, things that women could be fined for or arrested for, used he, but so do voting laws. So why, in some cases, is he used to describe a group of male and females, and then in other cases it just means men? Like, it was very ridiculous the way they would pick and choose. So I really enjoyed reading about that. There were times when I was infuriated because I understood, like, being a woman and being shut out of something because it says he, but then when it suits somebody's, end goal, I am included under he. Like, it's very annoying. So that's kind of how they came into play to get rid of that ambiguity. The next book I finished, I didn't bring it up here because it's kind of heavy. It's like a coffee table book. So I knew going in that it wasn't going to be an exceptional read, just because it's not meant to be. It's meant to be more of a let's look through the pictures while I'm waiting for somebody type of book. That was Kings and Queens, A Chronicle of History's Most Interesting Monarchies by Brenda Ralph Lewis. Oh, I had some issues. So pretty early on, it's discussing Elizabeth, the Countess of Bathory, or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly what her title is. And it talked about how intermarrying led to a lot of issues. Specifically, the word used was mental derangements. And the author listed off mental derangements that the family suffered from, including like actual mental health concerns like schizophrenia, depression, etc. But then she also chucked bisexuality onto that list. And if the verbiage had been such that she was referring to what they viewed as mental derangements, I would have been less pissed off, but it wasn't. It was very much written as though the author were presenting her views on the subject, and that made me angry. My second issue came in the section, I believe it was Don Carlos of Spain. In the first blurb, she has his name, and then she has the year of his birth and the year of his death, like they, people do a lot in writing. Literally 3 sentences later, she gives a different year for the year of his birth. So which is it? And how do you forget within 3 sentences what his year of birth was? Very confused about that. The other thing I took issue with is less of a problem, but I still think it's a stupid sentence. There's a section on Eleanor of Aquitaine, whom I love, and I'm very happy she was included, but she said that Eleanor of Aquitaine was too sexy to get approval from priests. I just can't. I can't with that book. My final issue was that every single monarch included in here was European. However, that's not in the title. It just says History's Most Interesting Monarchs. So I was a little annoyed that the only interesting monarchs apparently are European. And my second issue was that fully half of the book did nothing but follow British monarchs. That's it. And I just can't, I cannot believe that in all of history, British monarchs are so interesting that they bump everybody else so much so that they take up half of the book. Look, it is what it is. It's not meant to be taken that seriously, I don't think. But I understand why it was clearanced now. The next book I finished was The Rosewater Redemption by Tade Thompson. This is the 3rd book in the Wormwood trilogy, so I really can't say much about the book itself, other than I thought it was a pretty good ending for the trilogy. I'm not mad at how the author chose to end things. The basic synopsis of the Wormwood trilogy is that aliens have gained like a foothold on Earth, and they released, it's like a fungus into the air, and it settles on people's skin, and it's created something called the Xenosphere, and there are certain people who can tap into the Xenosphere and gain access to other people's thoughts, which is very interesting. So I really enjoyed that concept of, rather than aliens introducing obscure tech, they introduced fungus. I don't know, I really liked it. The next book I read was kind of more of a novella. It's called The Black Tides of Heaven by Neon Yang. I don't totally know how to talk about this book, because as far as the way the author writes, and as far as the pacing goes, and as far as the story being interesting, that was like 5-star level for me. The problem is, there were so many things that were mentioned and not discussed further, to the point that I really have no idea what's going on. I do know that when this novella was released, a second novella in the series was released at the same time. I'm not sure why that was the choice that was made, so I suppose I should reserve judgment until I read that, because it's possible that a lot of my questions are answered in there. But when it comes to just judging this one book, this one individual published book, there were just too many things that they said, but I got no information on. And it made it really confusing. And then on top of that, we are following these twins that are born. And the beginning starts when they're born, and by the end, and I'm talking like probably 200, 250 pages, that's all we get, they're in their 30s. So we get very little about their lives. At one point, one of them like leaves and becomes not like an outcast, but he's not really welcome back home because he left. But I'm still not clear on why. Why did he leave? Why is he not welcome? I don't know. So many questions that I couldn't really give it a 5-star. But it was an interesting world. It's fantasy, and in this world, the children that are born are not assigned a gender. Until they make it clear what gender they align with, they are just referred to as they wear gender-neutral clothing, and that's just the way the world is. Now, some children make it pretty clear what gender they align with when they're in their toddler ages, but then other ones wait until they're in their teens, which I think is kind of an interesting concept. And then there's some kind of like confirmation ceremony that comes along with it when you choose your gender. I really enjoy when authors speculate about worlds that just aren't like ours, when they can see that the way that we live is not necessarily the only way to live. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. The next book I read was Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This was, I mean, I was always going to love it because it's Sarah Waters. I've pretty much loved everything she's written. This one I talk about a lot in my reading vlog. We're following a girl. She's roughly 18, I think, when the book starts. Her name is Nancy Astley. She lives in a small town of Whitstable. They're known for their oysters. Her family has like a restaurant where they make those oysters and sell them. And because of this, Nancy is known as an oyster girl. Now, Nancy also has a passion for theater, and she frequently goes to the theater and just watches the act, and it's kind of her getaway. Well, she's there one day and she sees Miss Kitty Butler. Her act on the stage is that she's a male impersonator. They end up becoming friends because Nancy is just obsessed with her act, and she goes back night after night after night to see her. She ends up being Kitty's dresser, and when Kitty gets a contract in London, she asks Nancy to come with her. Through a series of events, Nancy ends up joining her act and takes the stage name of Nan King. Then Kitty does some pretty horrible things, to be honest, and Nancy just bails, and she's on her own in Victorian London. I learned a lot about sex workers in Victorian London while reading this, and I'm not sure it's ever really a topic that I've been interested in learning about, but this book made it incredibly interesting, and now I kind of want to know more. The next book I finished was Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. This is the first book by Octavia E. Butler that I've read, honestly because I wanted to read something by this author, but Kindred is all anybody ever talks about, and so I wanted to try something else. So I picked up the first book in the Xenogenesis trilogy, and it was phenomenal. Honestly. It's science fiction, and Earth has destroyed itself. This alien race happens to be nearby as Earth is dying, and they save what is left of humanity. Humanity isn't really that grateful, though, because the aliens want something in trade for saving their lives. First of all, this is probably the most convincing depiction of alien life that I have ever read. They are a society in which, instead of people pairing off and then having children and being a family that way, they go in threes. The main reason for this pairing off of 3 rather than 2 is that they do not have like binary when it comes to gender. They have 3 genders. They have what we would consider male, what we would consider female, and then they have a third gender who does have a name, but I don't know how it's pronounced. It's spelled O-O-L-O-I. And I don't know how to say that. I kind of want to listen to an audiobook version of this, just so I can hear it. Anyway, they have some interesting abilities, and overall I was just completely fascinated at how Octavia E. Butler wrote the alien interactions with each other, the alien interactions with the humans, how the humans reacted to the aliens, and then also how the humans interacted with each other, with this very strange situation they have found themselves in. I started reading the second book last night, and it's good too. I can't get over how amazing this series is. The next book I finished was Lab Girl by Hope Jahren. I think I'm saying her last name right. I listened to this on audiobook, and the author narrates it, and she pronounces it Jahren. So that's what we're going with, unless I like really misheard. But that's what I recall. This was phenomenal. This is a memoir, which is not my usual read, but it is the memoir of a scientist, and the way she weaves her life as a scientist into just her life as a human is beautiful. There was enough science in there to keep me interested, but I thought the way she made the science apply to her life was brilliant. This book is very raw. Hope does not pull any punches, and especially in the audiobook you can hear the ache in her voice as she goes through some of these passages, and I feel like writing this book was some kind of catharsis for her. And it was beautiful. There were so many moments that I thought were funny. I love her interactions with Bill, who is her partner in her lab. They're the perfect example of how men and women can be friends and not have any romantic feelings toward each other. And it was just so well done. This is a book that I honestly will probably read again and again throughout my life. The next book I finished was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I love Elizabeth Acevedo. I read With the Fire on High last year or 2 years ago? I can't remember. And I thought it was beautifully written. Elizabeth Acevedo really just understands how to write a novel in verse and have it be beautiful and impactful, but also tell a complete story. Clap When You Land is the story of these 2 girls. They're both roughly 16 or 17, I think. I think roughly 16. One lives in New York, one lives in the Dominican Republic, and what they don't realize is that they share a father until his plane goes down and he dies. And the depictions of the way the different girls handle their grief and handle finding out that their father maybe wasn't everything they thought he was beautifully done. I cannot recommend Elizabeth Acevedo highly enough. She is, I think, primarily a YA author, but I think her books transcend age, honestly. The next book I read was a Royal Diaries book. This is Cleopatra the 7th. This was not that good, I'm going to be honest with you. That being said, it's also written for a middle grade audience, not adults. Okay, so this is written when she's about 12. And the main Cleopatra story seems to be when she's closer to adult. I think 18 is usually roughly what they put her as when she meets Julius Caesar for the first time, and, you know, her life takes off from there. But because of the nature of the Royal Diaries series, they always have to start when they're roughly the age of the audience they're writing for. And in order to really introduce the players in that main Cleopatra storyline that everybody learns at some point in their life, she kind of had Cleopatra running into all these characters in ways that weren't totally believable. But, like, I understand why she did it, because she wanted to introduce the main players in the Cleopatra story, and the only real way to do that when she was 12 years old is kind of the way the author chose to do it. So, I mean, I'm not rating this. I don't usually rate these because I don't know how. They're not written for me, but they are a lot of fun, and they're nice just for a palate cleanser sometimes. The next book I read was Mirrorland by Carol Johnstone. This has been said to be like if the writing of Gillian Flynn and Stephen King like had a baby, basically. And I do see where that comparison comes into play with it, because there was an element of horror, but it almost kind of felt more like magical realism to me, because the main character does a lot of reminiscing on this imagination game that she used to play with her sister when they were kids, and her remembrances are quite vivid, and it's very much a, wait, this isn't real, right? Because this isn't where she was 2 seconds ago. And so that part was kind of confusing, but once you get used to that, it has a pretty good storyline and a very good atmosphere. I didn't care for the ending, though. I thought that was going to be where it was going, and I hoped so desperately that it wasn't. And for a minute, I thought I got my wish. And then it all came crashing down. But, I mean, it's not a bad read. It's fast-paced, and if you like thrillers, why not? Okay, we're almost done. I read Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. This book I was so intimidated by, and I think because it seems like serious literary fiction, but it's so accessible that I don't know why I was afraid of it, like I shouldn't have been. This is Cal telling his story about being intersex. He is telling it from the point of view of the mutation on his 5th chromosome that led to his being born intersex. So you're following the gene as it gets passed down through his grandparents to his parents to him. It's very bizarre. He's like an omniscient narrator, which I'm not sure I totally like it. Like, I appreciate what the author was trying to do with that, but I don't know if it totally worked for me. However, I found the story very readable. I actually learned quite a lot. What was really cool about this is when Cal's family, his grandparents, leave, I believe it's modern-day Turkey, to come to America, they settle in Detroit. My family is mostly from Detroit, and so it was interesting to see what Detroit was like at various times when, like, my grandparents would have been living there. So I appreciated that. They also talk about the race riots that took place in 1967, and the author gives a very interesting view on that whole situation that I really appreciated. I'm going to leave it there because I talk about this a lot in my reading vlog, and I know there are some people who watch like all my videos, and I don't want to be super repetitive, and also I already said everything I had to say in that, so to repeat myself here, like, that gets annoying for me, honestly. The final book I read in the first half of June was Salvage by Madeline Roux? R-O-U-X? I feel like that'd be Roux. Okay, this is one of those stories that is just so readable, and you just eat it up. But the writing is bad. So, here, I have a couple issues. First of all, in my opinion, in order to write a convincing science fiction novel, you have to have a good, solid grasp on basic scientific principles. I don't think this author does. A lot of that is because nothing is described or explained. It just is. And I'm like, okay, cool. So like, no description, no world building, nothing? Alright, cool. The other thing that I wasn't crazy about is that the crux of the story is that there is some kind of alien infection, I suppose is the best way to describe it. And it is exactly what the proto-molecule in the Expanse series is. So it very much feels like a ripoff of that. And yes, this book was written long after the first book in the Expanse series came out. Because of that, I knew where the story was going. I knew exactly what was going to happen because I've already read this book. That being said, the characters were fun, and it was a compelling read. But yeah, too many things like that, with the writing not being good, it feeling like a ripoff. So I can't rate it highly, but if you're just looking for a fast-paced science fiction novel, like, give this one a shot. And those are the books I read in the first half of June. Interestingly, there have been full months where I've read less books than I read in the first 2 weeks of this month. I'm reading as though I'm like 14 again, and I love it. So let me know in the comment section all your thoughts on the books I read. If you have any questions, specific questions, especially if they lead into like spoiler territory, you can feel free to ask me them in the comments or on any social media platform you choose. My links are always in the description box. Also, don't forget, if you're interested, come check out the live show that I'm going to be doing with Amrita and Rosie on Saturday, June 19th, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We would love to have you. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.